Hey everyone, Pants here from the Skeptaholics podcast. Before we get started today, I just want to run through our socials here really quick to let you know where you can find us to keep up with the content. You can find us on Facebook at the Skeptaholics podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Skeptaholics, and you can find us on TikTok at Skeptaholics podcast. Find and download the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon Music, Pandora, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and anywhere else you can find your favorite podcasts. You can even tell your Alexa-enabled device, "Hey Alexa, play the Skeptaholics podcast." Guys, liking and following on all of our social media accounts is the best way to help us out. So give us a like, give us a follow, and share with your friends. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Skeptaholics podcast, your source for all things conspiracy, true crime, unexplained, and unsolved. All we ask is that you keep an open mind and always question everything.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Skeptaholics podcast. I'm Paul, here with Jamie. How are you doing?
Living the dream.
And Jake, how's it going tonight?
Good. Good evening, everybody.
Good. We're going to cover tonight the Manson family and the Manson family murders. Kind of a sketchy episode. I feel like we do this as a prequel to a lot of episodes or a lot of discussion that we have that isn't quote-unquote politically correct, but obviously it's nothing that we cover is anything we agree with. We are just covering a timeline of events surrounding a topic, so please don't mistake us covering this episode as us being in favor of what happened or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Kind of sad that, sitting here talking about anything from history, whether it's, something like the Manson family murders or something like the Nazi occult or anything like that even has to be mentioned. But right, just for sheer covering of our asses, we obviously know views or topics discussed in this podcast are the expression of our own. So without further ado, I think, Jamie, you're going to start us off, aren't you?
Yep. So, who was Charles Manson? There isn't a ton known about him prior to the psychopathy of 1969. But what we do know is that he was born in 1934 to a teenage mother. Charles Manson's early childhood and young life was spent bouncing around between relatives and later in and out of institutions in the Midwest. He's kind of always a troubled kid. Sometime in his early 20s, he married twice and fathered a son. And Manson was considered so thoroughly institutionalized by the authorities that upon his final release before he went to prison for these murders in 1967, apparently, he actually asked the warden if he could just stay in prison. I can't imagine ever thinking that way, but I've also never been to prison, and I don't plan to. So instead of keeping him in prison, which obviously they can't just keep somebody in prison, he migrated to Berkeley and then San Francisco, cities that became flooded with young people looking to embark on a new way of life. He was always an older figure among the crowd, and he amassed a small group of followers, pretty much entirely women. And in 1968, headed along with several female followers to Los Angeles to pursue a music career. This guy was like big into music. I don't know if it was the LSD that we'll get to or what the deal was, but he was like, he wanted to be a rock star. And he actually learned how to play the guitar, I believe the steel guitar in prison. Manson's tools of persuasion were the lax social codes of the late 1960s, in which runaway hippies mingled freely with Hollywood royalty. I wasn't alive then, but I've heard it was a kind of a different time. So part of this, to kind of, I guess, go more into it, to kind of prove to you about him wanting to be a rock star, he actually became really good friends with Dennis Wilson, the drummer for the Beach Boys, which we're not going to get into the Beach Boys today, I don't think, too much. But anyway, so through Dennis Wilson, Charles Manson met other music industry players and grew increasingly fixed on stardom, all the while exercising greater and greater control over the group that became known as the Manson Family. He was, as investigative journalist Jeff Gwynne put in Manson, The Life and Times of Charles Manson, he was the wrong man in the right place at the right time. So the family, it wasn't actually his, blood family, but they call it the Manson family. A little bit about them. So Charles Manson's family literally worshipped him. They followed him around like a flock of sheep. He thought of himself as like Jesus incarnate.
Yeah, it was like a Jim Jones fucking cult.
Yeah, fuck Jim Jones too. Don't get me started on him. Manson is described as hypnotic and enticing in manner, drawing in family members through a facade of free love, support, drugs. I'm assuming drugs was the big one here. High times and euphoria. The family is a community. They are each other's only family with real feelings of devotion and loyalty. For Manson and his followers, it's the only family they've ever had. They think. All these people came from families, obviously, but a lot of broken families. Manson's life history seems to lead up to the atrocious acts committed in the summer of 1969. So the family started with a woman by the name of Mary Teresa Brunner. She was actually the first woman that Manson had a sexual encounter with after his long tenure in California State Penitentiary. Other women came along and played out Manson's desires, creating a sense of inseparable community. The family wasn't really a family until 1968, when a reporter came to Span Ranch after multiple marijuana busts and referred to the Manson clan as the Manson family. So with most serial killers and, famous criminals, a lot of this naming ends up coming from, the newspapers then, but, just the media in general. Their Volkswagen van became too small for Manson's group, so they acquired a school bus to continue their travels, arguably probably a short bus, mystical experiences, and musical endeavors. This continued until the group became too large, and they finally settled in at the aforementioned Span Movie Ranch, a rundown movie set left open for the hippie, LSD-ridden Manson family. The ranch continued to provide the family with a hotbed on which their free-loving community could continue to thrive with Manson at its head. So, basically, the guy just, for some reason, he was very charismatic, apparently. I mean, you see pictures of him lately. Well, he's dead now, but in his later years, and the guy is just mangled. But, you see some pictures of him in his younger days, and I guess it's kind of, I can see, I guess, why people would kind of gravitate towards him. But that kind of brings me to the whole reasoning for why this happened and how batshit crazy this guy was. So Manson's whole ideology was called Helter Skelter. The name was based off of a Beatles song off their White Album. So basically the core of Charles Manson's philosophy was racial Armageddon. He preached that the black man would rise up and start killing members of the white establishment and turn the cities into an inferno of racial revenge. The blacks would win this war, but would not be able to hang on to the power he seized because of innate inferiority. During this time, the thought of an impending racial war was not to be discarded entirely. Because, you got to think at this point, we're not far out of, we're right. Yeah, we're right with Martin Luther King and the Black Panthers and everything like that. This is at the forefront of America at this point. The idea that it was his responsibility to trigger and overcome this Armageddon is what separated Manson's thinking from that of a lot of other people at that time. So in 1968, when he was forecasting this racial war, he used the Beatles' White Album as, apparently he thought like every song on the album was like speaking to him and telling him to incite this race war and kind of say, predicting the future. Anyways, so Helter Skelter would begin when Manson's family committed some super atrocious crimes against whites in Bel Air and Beverly Hills in a way that would make everyone think they were committed by blacks. These were intended to enrage the white establishment until there was open revolution in the streets. Then the black man would win the war, assuming the white man's karma. He would then be established. And at that time, Charles Manson and his family would then survive this Holocaust by hiding in the desert, safe from the turmoil. He believed that the bottomless pit mentioned in the book of Revelations was a cave underneath Death Valley, which they actually apparently found this cave, and he convinced his people that that's where they would go. And inside, they would find a city of gold, a paradise where his chosen family would wait out the apocalypse. While they were waiting there, they would multiply to 144,000, which is a number he also drew from the book of Revelations, and they would return to the surface to rule the world over their black servants. Despite his obviously racial motivations, Manson saw himself as a second coming of Christ, and the Beatles were the four horsemen who came as prophets of this war of all wars. I mean, does LSD do this to people? Because, like, the dude's fucking nuts.
Essentially, no. But you take enough of it. I know a few people that have taken a few too many trips and they just kind of checked out. But
you just got it. You're just fried permanently at that point.
Yeah. Well, what I found intriguing about, this was looking at, back to when, Manson spent, most of his life in prison, even in his early years. He was only out of prison from 1967 to 1970, I think, till he was convicted.
Yeah.
And, moving around, as a young person to these institutions, one of the psychologists that was working with Manson was, he ended up being part of the CIA, in the NK Ultra mind control program. So you want to jump down a conspiracy?
That would do it.
Yeah, exactly. If you know anything about the MK Ultra program, that was spearheaded by the CIA, and it wasn't just about mind control. It was about reprogramming the mind, seeing what you can do. See if you can get rid of empathy. See if you can get rid of, anything. I think it was what the movie was it Manchurian Candidate was pretty much a play-by-play of MK Ultra.
I believe so, yeah.
So in this being in the early days, of this program, they were in the experimental phase. So if they would take somebody that just bounces from, one crime to another, one institution to another, nobody cares about this person. Nobody, it came from a broken home, family didn't want him. Who cares? He jumps out, goes crazy, jumps off a cliff. We could only be so lucky, but who cares? So they take people like this and they run them through their tests and their hypnosis and mind control or whatever they were doing. And I think he's one of the cases that didn't take. They couldn't control him, but he kept getting getting out of jail. There's only so many times you can go to prison before they throw away the key. Then Manson asking to stay in prison, I think he knew that something was not right and he should just stay there.
Possible.
So
makes sense.
I think it was a case that the mind control didn't take on him because he was, apparently a relatively intelligent individual. But he not only had information of the programming that didn't take, I think what he did is he turned it around and studied the programming. Okay, so if you want to, break somebody down psychologically and reprogram them, I don't know, maybe a drug like LSD would be great for that. So you read a few, psychology books along with your CIA, training, and some philosophy books. So you sound like a guru. Read Revelations. It's not far fetched to me that a person like this could show up at a time, a time period in history like this, you know, uh, free love and whatnot. And, if you follow it down the rabbit hole and look at his incarcerations, there's a reason that he didn't stay locked up. Seems like every time you turn around, he kept getting kicked out of prisons, kicked out of jail. Just go, just get out of here, and I say there's got to be a reason for that. You don't get incarcerated that many times just to be let go every time. As long as one time sentence I think was from 1960 to 1967. That 7 years was the longest stint that he did in one shot.
Yeah.
But then, once he got to San Francisco and got down to Haight Ashbury, there was a free clinic that was set up down there, for the people or whatever. Come to find out, one of the psychologists or psychiatrists that was working at on Haight Ashbury's on those streets at this free clinic was the same dude that worked for the CIA that was Manson's psychologist when he was in prison. Same dude.
Weird.
How did he? I mean, it's a heck of a coincidence. If
Yeah.
you ask me.
Seems like maybe that was instituted to try to rein in some sort of control, maybe?
Not really control, just observation. Okay,
maybe
it didn't
reverse the process, or
I think it was just observation. Let's see what happens. All right, this one didn't go right. It didn't take, but let's see what happens. I think they kept him under surveillance the whole time, my opinion.
Very well possible. Very well possible. That's a super, super interesting theory. And of course, we're going to cover MK Ultra later on in another episode. But kind of keeping the ball rolling here, moving forward, we'll jump in. I'll cover some of the crimes that the Manson family committed. Throughout, what was it, like a 2-year run or something? I don't remember offhand. It looks like
yeah, if you include all the auto thefts and everything else that they were into.
Yeah, so it mainly, most of the murders took place in 1969, but they were on a pretty good streak for a couple of years as a whole, involved in other crimes and such. So the first murder of the Manson family took place on May 18th, 1969. Terry Melcher visited Spawn Ranch to hear Manson and the women sing. Melcher arranged a subsequent visit not long thereafter, during which he brought a friend who possessed a mobile recording unit, but Melcher did not record the group. By June, Manson was telling the family they might have to show blacks how to start Helter Skelter. When Manson tasked Watson with obtaining money, supposedly intended to help the family prepare for the conflict, Watson defrauded a black drug dealer named Bernard Lotzapapa Crow. Crow responded with a threat to wipe out everyone at the Spawn Ranch. The family countered on July 1st, 1969, by shooting Crow at Manson's Hollywood apartment. Manson's belief that he had killed Crow was seemingly confirmed by a newspaper report of the discovery of the dumped body of a Black Panther in Los Angeles. Although Crow was not a member of the Black Panthers, Manson concluded that he had been and expected retaliation from the Panthers. He turned Spawn Ranch into a defensive camp with night patrols of armed guards. Tex Watson would later write, "If we needed any more proof that Helter Skelter was coming down very soon, this was it." Blackie was trying to get at the chosen ones. Moving forward with the crimes, the Hinman murder. Gary Allen Hinman was a music teacher and a PhD student at UCLA. At some point in the late 1960s, he befriended members of the Manson family, allowing some to occasionally stay at his house. Manson sent family members Bobby Busalil, Mary Brunner, and Susan Atkins to Hinman's home on July 25, 1969, to convince him to join the family and turn over the assets Manson thought Hinman had inherited. The three individuals held the uncooperative Hinman hostage for 2 days, during which time Manson arrived with a sword and slashed his ear. After that, Busalil stabbed Hinman to death, allegedly on Manson's instruction. Before leaving the Topanga Canyon residence, Busalil or one of the women used Hinman's blood to write "Political Piggy" on the wall and to draw a panther paw, a Black Panther symbol. In magazine interviews of 1981 and 1998 to 1999, Busalil said he went to Hinman's to recover money paid to Hinman for drugs that had supposedly been bad. He added that Brunner and Atkins, unaware of his intent, went along merely to visit Hinman. Atkins, in her 1977 autobiography, wrote that Manson directly told Busalil, Brunner, and her to go to Hinman's and get the supposed inheritance of $21,000. She said that 2 days earlier, Manson had told her privately that if she wanted to do something important, quote unquote, she could kill Hinman and get his money. Busalil was arrested on August 6, 1969, after he was caught driving Hinman's car. Police found a murder weapon in the tire well. 2 days later, Manson told family members at Spawn Ranch, "Now is the time for Helter Skelter." So, I mean, you can see that as we're progressing through this, they started moving pretty fucking quick. And it really kind of seemingly money motivated and attacking people close to them that they were seemingly trusting. It's just, to me, it seems like something snapped and then it was all just balls to the walls, for lack of better terms.
Why Helter Skelter? Why the race war? You know, the whole 1960s were a race powder keg, you know, just waiting for things to erupt. You know, where did Manson get this idea that, you know, this race war would be 100% catastrophic? I mean, like, to the point of end times where, you know, they're going to emerge after this race war apocalypse. It doesn't even make any sense. Even, you know, I understand that the Black Panthers were a very, you know, militant group.
Look at us now 50 years later. I mean, just to give some, it all starts with an ideology. All it takes is somebody to say, "I wonder what would happen if we do this." And if you take that and you look at us now 50 years later, we're basically in the same shoe boat as Helter Skelter, but it's coming from different sectors. Instead of it being Manson, without having any political ties or anything like that being expressed in this episode, if you sit back and you look at what big government is doing right now, and Jamie was worried about getting us canceled earlier, this is going to fucking do it.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Without us having any kind of political ties tied to the conversation that I'm bringing up right now, you look at us 50 years later and you have the elitists of the world who, through the Democratic Party, have always kind of targeted the African Americans. You have the 1985 crack pandemic. You have so many different instances where the Democratic Party promises to uplift African Americans, and then they do nothing but try to keep them down. You look at what Kamala Harris has done in California with even nonviolent convictions and the astronomical amounts of prison sentences that have been tied to them. You look at every little thing racially related like that, and you can see that they're starting that powder keg again. They want that racial division to erupt, and it's been happening for the last 12 years. They've been slowly ingraining this into us, and now you have movements built off of the Black Panthers in today's society, like the Black Lives Matter movement, that is getting a bad rap because of the rioting and looting that is attached to it for what could be argued to be a good cause and a just cause, and something that I think most of America would stand up for. But then you get these radicalists like Charles Manson in today's society who go on to online forums and call for a white genocide in the Black Lives Matter name, and this, that, and the other thing, and it's building that powder keg again. So it's all based off of an ideology. And all it took was that one little idea and something to set it in motion for it to happen at any kind of a time. Because if you look at, 12 years ago, we were coming off of peace and unity over 9/11. With what happened on 9/11, 2001, that brought our country closer together than anything else in the last 50 years. And now they're trying to drive that divide again. That's the only thing I can see, and that's the only thing that I can relate to, because that's the only thing that I've been alive for, to try to tie it to your question.
They have to drive that wedge in there to push their political agenda. Otherwise, they don't have a leg to stand on. It's pretty simple, divide and conquer.
And to be clear, it's not one side or the other. I said no political parties.
No, it's both sides, because
yes,
we as a people united is their worst nightmare. Look at what's happening right now with like GameStop and these index funds.
Yes, absolutely.
The united people of America, all races, colors, and creeds. That's all the elite's worst enemy.
Well, and I think it's funny. I think it's hilarious because, since that whole GameStop thing has come out and AOC has come out and called for an investigation into Robinhood and these other companies, since that has happened, I've been seeing a lot of memes where you have the uber right conservatives say, it's something along the lines of, I always thought I'd fight a civil war, but I never thought I'd do it alongside a Democrat. And it's true. Right now, there is going to be a huge fight to save a lot of what is constitutionally right between, I don't care what side of the fence you lie on, between social media giants hindering freedom of speech, between what Robinhood and all these other investment companies are doing, because the little man found a loophole. You can say whatever bullshit. You can say whatever bullshit you want to say about, they're private companies, they can do whatever you want. That doesn't apply to Robinhood, because that's the stock market. That's supposed to be a free market exchange. That is not supposed to be hindered in any way. I'm talking right now specifically about social media. When it comes to social media, you can say whatever you want to about these companies. But if they are a publicly traded company, I think they should have to follow the laws of the Constitution and allow freedom of speech and not hinder that freedom whatsoever just because they don't agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I guess my only add-on to that, though, is I just want to make sure people understand that freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequence, though.
No, not at all.
Let's just remember that.
Not at all. I mean, obviously, you know me personally. I'm very outspoken about a lot of things. Both of you know me personally.
Yeah.
Both of you know that I'm very outspoken about a lot of things. And I speak on my private forums, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or whatever, just in light. I speak what I feel, but I understand that there is going to be backlash for it. I understand that there are going to be people who have a different opposing view. But what a lot of the world forgets nowadays is compromise. There has to be willingness to compromise. And you and I, Jamie, have had conversations wherein you have seen me compromise with your point of view. I'm obviously very open to compromise if you can provide me something that is concrete and I'm not going to say factual, but logical. Something that could make me say, hey, you know what? That would be worth looking at changing my point of view for. And there's not enough of that in the world today. And that's where a lot of shit is going wrong. Is people have forgotten how to compromise. And if you can compromise and heal and work towards a greater outcome together, we can get back to normal life.
It's interesting to see all these social issues going on today, because I mean it's like the 1960s 2.0, or 3.0 right now. But I always found it interesting. All right, there's all this racial tension in the country and this and that. Then you walk into a grocery store in a big city and you look around and there's African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, whites. You're standing there with, maybe your spouse, significant other, kids. Everybody's just buying groceries. You leave there, you go to Great America, or, the amusement park or a fair or something, and guess what? Everybody's just there with their kids and living life and playing games and having a good time. How much of this agenda is just made up? It's just made up. Most people want to get up in the morning, go to work, make a good living, come home, feed their families, and just live. That's what people do. So how is, I don't know. I guess maybe I need somebody to explain it to me, how this happens, really.
Well, it falls back on that ideology that I was talking about to answer your question. There's a lot of gullible people out there in the world, and that can be seen in a lot of comment sections of Facebook and other places, Reddit, Twitter, everything else, where they are spoon fed information. Whether that information is correct or not, they are spoon fed a bit of information. And they take that to heart and they hold that as fact without doing any research themselves to find out if it's true or not. And then they take and they hold grudges or virtue signal or start a movement based off of that information. And that's how it snowballs.
But where do we place that blame, though? Do we place it upon the gullible people for not doing the research, or do we place it on the mainstream media for twisting this information in a way that they deem fit? I feel like a lot of people place the blame on, oh yeah, do your research. Oh, you dummy, if you'd have just Googled it, blah blah blah. But I mean, if you can Google anything and you can find something to support your point of view.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not.
Yes.
How do you even know what's fact anymore? Even if you do your research, pretty much everything, for the most part, I shouldn't even say pretty much, but for the most part, a lot of things you can do your research on are biased one way or the other to begin with.
So, with that, the advice that I give people when I am faced with a debate about a situation wherein I'm asked to present facts is don't just look at one source. The old adage, behind every lie stands a shred of the truth, stands firm in everything. If you look at 25 different articles, you're going to find a commonality of information within each one of those articles. It may be a shred of information. It might be a 6-paragraph article, but there might be 3 sentences placed in throughout that paragraph that match with 7 other articles that you read. And you take that commonality of information and you use a little bit of common sense and deduction to formulate your own opinion about it. It doesn't make it fact-based, but the fact that you found it throughout so many different articles, and that's the information that you're relaying or arguing off of, is what will support what you're trying to say. But where a lot of people get hung up on is, oh, well, it might say that in that article, but it says 70 other things to the contradictory. Yeah, that's one article. Look at you have to always look at a plethora of information. You have to do a little bit of free thinking for yourself, and you have to come up with your own formulated opinion of what the truth is in order to get behind what you're actually talking about. And that's the hardest thing for a lot of people who are the quote unquote gullible, because they just want to turn on their TV and be fed the information, and they want to be told what is thought, what to think, because that's what has been going on for them for so long. I mean, even look at us when we were children. Our parents guided us how to think morally, how to act morally, everything else. We have a society today who is kind of coddled and spoon fed, and I hate to say it in a negative way, because it kind of makes it seem like, oh well, 50 years ago in the 60s, 60 years ago in the 50s, when people used to beat their kids with belts and switches, was a good thing. Not necessarily, but a form of discipline. Today's society doesn't understand consequence. Today's society doesn't understand common sense. Today's society doesn't understand how to live life in the real world because of how our parents brought us up. That's what it boils down to. So everybody just takes that shred of the truth, surrounded by lies that they're spoon-fed, and they're comfortable with that. They don't want to look outside of that, because some may be afraid of what they're going to find. Some may be afraid of actually having their minds changed and not thinking the way they have for the last 20, 30 years, whatever the case may be. But free thinking, compromise, and understanding and compassion are the four key things that could fix what we are seeing in society today alone.
Meanwhile, back on the Manson Ranch.
Yeah. Meanwhile, back in the topic of tonight's episode, we have the third murder committed by the Manson family. The murders of Tate, Sebring, Folger. I'm not sure. I'm going to say Folger.
Fun fact on the side is Abigail Folger was actually an heiress to the Folger coffee fortune. Bingo. Perfect.
I actually used to live by a Folger coffee bean refinery down in Louisiana when I was there. Frykowski,
almost as cool as being an heiress to Folger coffee, but
Yeah. So anyway, we have the murders of Tate, Sebring, Folger, Frykowski, and Parent. August 8th, 1969, Manson directed Watson to take Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel to Melcher's former home at 10,050 CeeLo Drive in Los Angeles and kill everyone there. The home had only recently been rented to actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. Side note, Polanski was away in Europe working on the Day of the Dolphin movie when this happened. Manson told...
You want another side note about Roman Polanski?
Absolutely.
He's whacked.
Yeah, he actually he has a what is it called, a red flag or whatever, or red out by Interpol, because he pled guilty to banging a 13-year-old girl in 1977, and then fled the United States. He fled the United States, and he's been living in Poland, Switzerland, and France ever since, on the run. All while making movies that win Oscars in America.
Huh.
Wow.
Funny how that all works, huh?
Yeah, very interesting. So, Manson told the three women to do as Watson told them. The family members proceeded to kill the 5 people they found, which were Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant and had been living there at the time, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, who were visiting her, and Stephen Parent, who had been visiting the caretaker of the home. Atkins wrote "pig" with Tate's blood on the front door as they left. The murders created a nationwide sensation. And now we're going to arrive. This is kind of the longest one, but this is what I can only assume as the final murder of the Manson family, as there's nothing else listed. I don't know if they're attributed to anything beyond this at this time or anything like that. So
There's a few. I actually have a few that I can get to after you're done, but they're all kind of circumstantial.
yeah,
I guess.
yeah, no, like a no direct tie kind of thing.
It's
It's
like
all
believed
speculative.
but unconfirmed. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a few of them over the years, I think, that were speculated, and like it is like chopping up bodies and burying them around the ranch and like crazy stuff.
So I'll cover this one then, and you can jump in with that, and we'll keep on moving on with the rest of the podcast. But the murder of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. The next night of August 9th, 1969, 6 family members, Leslie Van Houten, Steve Clem Grogan, and the 4 of them from the previous night drove out on Manson's orders. Displeased by the panic attack of the victims at CeeLo Drive, Manson accompanied the 6 to show them how to do it. After a few hours' ride in which he considered a number of murders and even attempted one of them, Manson gave Kasabian directions that brought the group to 3301 Waverly Drive. This was the home of the supermarket executive Leno LaBianca and his wife, Rosemary, who was a dress shop co-owner. Located in the Los Feliz section of Los Angeles, it was next door to a house at which Manson and family members had attended a party the previous year. According to Atkins and Kasabian, Manson disappeared up the driveway and returned to say he had tied up the house's occupants. He then sent Watson up with Krenwinkel and Van Houten. In his autobiography, Watson stated that having gone up alone, Manson returned to take him up to the house with him. After Manson pointed out a sleeping man through a window, the 2 of them entered through the unlocked back door. Watson added at trial he went along with the women's account, which he figured made him, quote-unquote, look at that much less responsible. As Watson related it, Manson roused the sleeping Leno LaBianca from the couch at gunpoint and had Watson bind his hands with a leather thong. After Rosemary was brought briefly into the living room from the bedroom, Watson followed Manson's instructions to cover the couple's heads with pillowcases. He bound these in place with lamp cords. Manson left, sending Krenwinkel and Van Houten into the house with instructions that the couple be killed. Before leaving Spawn Ranch, Watson had accompanied to Manson of the inadequacy of the previous night's weapons. Now sending the women in from the kitchen to the bedroom to which Rosemary LaBianca had been returned, he went to the living room and began stabbing Leno LaBianca with a chrome-plated bayonet. The first thrust went into the man's throat. Sounds of a scuffle in the bedroom drew Watson there to discover Rosemary LaBianca keeping the women at bay by swinging the lamp tied to her neck. After subduing her with several stabs of the bayonet, he returned to the living room and resumed attacking Leno, whom he stabbed a total of 12 times with the bayonet. After this attack, the word war was carved into his abdomen by a perpetrator. Returning to the bedroom, Watson found Krenwinkel stabbing Rosemary LaBianca with a knife from the LaBianca kitchen. Heeding Manson's instruction to make sure each of the women played a part, Watson told Van Houten to stab Mrs. LaBianca too. She did, stabbing her approximately 16 times in the back in the exposed buttocks. At trial, Van Houten would claim uncertainly that Rosemary LaBianca was dead when she stabbed her. Evidence showed that many of Mrs. LaBianca's 41 stab wounds had, in fact, been inflicted post-mortem. While Watson cleaned off the bayonet and showered, Krenwinkel wrote "Rise," as well as "Death to Pigs" on the walls, and "Helter Skelter" on the refrigerator door, all in LaBianca's blood. She gave Leno LaBianca 14 puncture wounds with an ivory-handled, two-tined carving fork, which she left jutting out of his stomach. She also planted a steak knife in his throat. Meanwhile, hoping for a double crime, Manson had gone on to direct Kasabian to drive to the Venice home of an actor acquaintance of hers, another quote-unquote piggy. Depositing the other 3 family members who had departed Spawn Ranch with him that evening at the man's apartment building, Manson drove back to the Spawn Ranch, leaving them and the LaBianca killers to hitchhike home. Kasabian thwarted this murder by deliberately knocking on the wrong apartment door and waking a stranger. As the group abandoned the murder plan and left, Atkins defecated in the stairwell. So, I mean, I don't know what the point of shitting in a stairwell is, but okay.
You gotta go, I guess.
Yes.
Middle of a murder or not.
So, yeah, I mean, you can see that last night alone was kind of a hate-fueled, just frenzy of murder with a lot of unnecessary work.
Wow, that kind of says a lot, though. I mean, the shitting in the stairwell.
Yes.
When you're in the middle of something like that, you know, that's a very intense situation for most people. Okay, say it's, you know, not a murder, but you're in that fight or flight type state of mind. Your mind shuts off those functions of the body.
Yeah.
You know, when you get that adrenaline running and everything's, their mind didn't, or that guy, you know, his mind didn't shut that off. He was able to stop, take a shit, and leave. That's actually very disturbing. You know, apart from the shitting part. I mean, that alone is, you're not screwed tight.
I don't think I've ever, in all my years, thought about shitting on the stairs. But when in Rome, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, it kind of seems to me like it's a heat of the moment kind of thing. Because like Jake said, it seems like there's a lot of people I know. I mean, I used to have a friend when I went to the other high school around here that if you scared her bad enough, she would piss her pants. And it's that fight or flight instinct that, you know, like Jake said, once your mind shuts off kind of control over those kind of muscles, sometimes shit just happens, not to create a pun there or anything.
So there's a few other deaths with strong but unconfirmed connections to the Manson family. There's a 16-year-old Mark Waltz who wasn't a family member, but he was a freaking guest at Span Ranch. And he was a known friend of many of the family members. The family was reportedly shocked when he was murdered on July 17th, 1969. But Mark's brother was convinced that Manson was responsible for his death and even went as far as calling Manson while he was in prison in order to directly accuse him. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department investigated the Mansons and other Span Ranch inhabitants in regards to Mark Waltz's murder, but the case still remains unsolved to this day. Another one was John Philip Hott. He was an Ohio native. He had moved to California with a friend in the late 60s and met Manson in the summer of 69. He joined the Manson family and was among the group who was arrested in the October raid of the Klan for the Tate LaBianca murders. Manson, it's believed possibly Manson may have suspected him of being an informant. On November 5th, 1969, Hott was hanging out with some of the family, including Bruce Davis, who had been involved in killing Donald Shea on Manson's orders 2 months before. According to all the other family members present, Hott suddenly found a gun in the room, picked it up, and promptly shot himself while attempting a game of Russian roulette. The problem with that is, according to Jeff Gwynn's book, Manson, when police investigated the death, they found that the gun, rather than having 0 bullets and 1 spent shell casing, instead contained 7 bullets and 1 spent shell. Moreover, the gun had been wiped free of prints. Despite this, police concluded Hott had killed himself. He was 22 years old. And then there was one more kind of unsolved that happened around that time also. Reet Jurvetson was an Estonian refugee whose family fled to Canada to escape Soviet oppression during World War II. She moved to Los Angeles in 1969 and was killed just a few months later around November 15th. Yurvitson's body remained unidentified for nearly 35 years, during which time she was identified only as Jane Doe number 59. Advances in DNA technology ultimately allowed her body to be identified and her family notified in 2003. Authorities have always suspected a link between Yurvitson's murder and the Manson family due to the proximity of her body to the location of the Tate murders and the widely held belief that the unknown woman was a friend of the Manson family. Moreover, the proximity of her time of death to the death of family member John Hott, whose death was also strongly suspected to have come on the orders of Manson, as we just talked about, led to the speculation that Yurvitson was murdered because she witnessed his death. She was 19 years old when she died.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy times.
Yeah. Why don't you take away with the investigation and trials, Jake?
Now, onto the investigation. The Tate murders became national news August 9th, 1969. The Polanski's housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, had arrived at work that morning and discovered the murder scene. Can't even imagine that.
No.
On August 10th, detectives at the LA County Sheriff's Department, which had jurisdiction in the Hinman case, informed LAPD detectives assigned to the Tate case of the bloody writing at the Hinman house. Thinking the Tate murders were a consequence of a drug transaction, the Tate team ignored this and the crime's other similarities. The Tate autopsies were underway, and the LaBianca's bodies were yet to be discovered. Stephen Parent, the shooting victim in the Tate's driveway, was determined to have been an acquaintance of William Gerritsen, who lived in the guest house. Gerritsen was a young man hired by Rudy Altabelli to take care of the property while Altabelli was away. As the killers arrived, Parent had been leaving CeeLo Drive after a visit to Garrison. Held briefly as a Tate suspect, Garrison told police he had neither seen nor heard anything on the murder night. He was released August 11th, 1969, after undergoing a polygraph examination that indicated that he had not been involved in the crimes. Interviewed decades later, he stated that he had, in fact, witnessed a portion of the murders. As the examination suggested, Gerritsen died in August of 2016. The LaBianca crime scene was discovered at about 10:30 p.m. on August 10th, approximately 19 hours after the murders were committed. 15-year-old Frank Struthers, Rosemary's son from a prior marriage, and Leno's stepson, returned from a camping trip and was disturbed by seeing all the window shades of his house drawn and by the fact that his stepfather's speedboat was still attached to the family car, which was parked in the driveway. He called his older sister and her boyfriend. The boyfriend, Joe Dorgan, accompanied the younger Struthers into the home and discovered Leno's body. Rosemary's body was found by investigating police officers. On August 12th, 1969, the LAPD told the press it had ruled out any connection between the Tate and LaBianca homicides. On August 16th, 4 days later, the sheriff's office raided Span Ranch and arrested Manson and 25 others as suspects in a major auto theft ring that had been stealing Volkswagen Beetles and converting them into dune buggies. Weapons were seized, but because the warrant had been misdated, the group was released a few days later. In a report at the end of August, when virtually all leads had gone nowhere, the LaBianca's detectives noted a possible connection between the bloody writings at the LaBianca house and the singing group, the Beatles' most recent album. Still working separately from from the Tate team, the LaBianca team, checked with the sheriff's office in mid-October about possible similar crimes. They learned of the Hinman case. They also learned that the Hinman detectives had spoken with Biliosi's girlfriend, Kitty Lutzinger. She had been arrested a few days earlier with members of the Manson family. The arrest for the car thefts had taken place at the desert ranch to which the family had moved and where, unknown to authorities, its members had been searching Death Valley for a hole in the ground, access to the bottomless pit. A joint force of National Park Service Rangers and officers from the California Highway Patrol and Inyo County Sheriff's Office, federal, state, and county personnel had raided both Myers Ranch and Baker Ranch after following clues unwittingly left when the family members buried an earth mover owned by Death Valley National Monument. The raiders had found stolen dune buggies and other vehicles and had arrested 24 people, including Manson. A highway patrol officer found Manson hiding in a cabinet beneath Baker's bathroom sink. The officers had no idea that the people they were arresting were involved in the murders. So basically, if they weren't stealing cars, they probably would have never got caught.
Yeah.
Following up leads in a month after they had spoken to Lutzinger, LaBianca detectives contacted members of a motorcycle gang Manson tried to enlist as his bodyguards while the family was at Span Ranch. While the gang members were providing information that suggested a link between Manson and the murders, a dormitory mate of Susan Atkins informed the LAPD of the family's involvement in the crimes. Atkins was booked for the Hinman murders after she told sheriff's detectives that she had been involved in it. Transferred to Sybil Brand Institute, a detention center in Monterey Park, California, she had begun talking to bunkmates Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham, to whom she gave accounts of the events in which she had been involved. On December 1st, 1969, acting on the information from the sources, LAPD announced warrants for the arrest of Watson, Krenwinkel, and Kasabian in the Tate case. The suspects' involvement in the LaBianca murders was noticed. Manson and Atkins, already in custody, were not mentioned. The connection between the LaBianca case and the Van Houten case, who was also among those arrested near Death Valley, had not yet been recognized. Watson and Krenwinkel were already under arrest with authorities in McKinley, Texas, and Mobile, Alabama, having picked them up on notice from LAPD. Informed that a warrant was out for the arrest of Kasabian Kasabian voluntarily surrendered to authorities in Concord, New Hampshire on December 2nd. Before long, physical evidence such as Krenwinkel and Watson's fingerprints, which had been collected by the LAPD at Silo Drive, was augmented by evidence recovered by the public. On September 1st, 1969, the distinctive .22 caliber revolver Watson used on Parent, Sebring, and Fraiofsky had been found and given to the police by Stephen Weiss, a 10-year-old who lived near the Tate residence. In mid-December, the Los Angeles Times published a crime account based on the information Susan Atkins had given her attorney. Weiss's father made several phone calls, which finally prompted the LAPD to locate the gun in its evidence file and connect it with the murders via ballistic tests. Acting on the same newspaper account, a local ABC television crew quickly located and recovered the bloody clothing discarded by the Tate killers. The knives discarded en route from the Tate residence were never recovered. despite a search from some of the same crewmen and, months later, the LAPD. A knife found behind the cushion of a chair in the Tate living room was apparently that of Susan Atkins, who lost her knife in the course of the attack. So that's kind of how everybody got picked up. On to the trial. The trial began June 15th, 1970. The prosecution's main witness was Kasabian, who, along with Manson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel, had been charged with 7 counts of murder and 1 of conspiracy. Since Kasabian, by all accounts, had not participated in the killings, she was granted immunity in exchange for a testimony that detailed the night of the crimes. Originally, a deal had been made with Atkins in which the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty against her in exchange for her grand jury testimony on which the indictments were secured. Once Atkins repudiated that testimony, the deal was withdrawn because Van Houten had participated only in the LaBianca killings. She was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 of conspiracy. Originally, Judge William Knee had reluctantly granted Manson permission to act as his own attorney because of Manson's conduct, including violations of a gag order submitted on outlandish and nonsensical pre-trial motions. The permission was withdrawn before the trial's start. Manson filed an affidavit of prejudice against Knee, who was replaced by Judge Charles H. Older. On Friday, July 24th, the first day of testimony, Manson appeared in court with an X carved into his forehead. He issued a statement that he was considered inadequate and competent to speak or defend himself, and had X'd himself from the establishment's world. Over the following weekend, the female defendants duplicated the mark on their own foreheads. I'm a society. I'm just out. I got an X. See you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. If only it was that easy.
Right. The female defendants duplicated the mark on their own foreheads, as most family members, within another day or so. So everybody did this. This is how much control he had over these people. He didn't tell them to do it. They just seen that he did it, and they went ahead and did it themselves. All right, here, take a knife to your forehead and carve an X. I don't know a lot of sane people that would do that. Just saying. Years later, Manson carved X into a swastika, as we all know. And see, I thought he had carved a swastika right away. I thought that's what it was.
I thought so too.
Yeah, apparently
that's what that's the assumption I was under also.
Yeah, I guess he did that years later.
Huh.
The prosecution argued that the triggering of Helter Skelter was Manson's main motive. The crime scene's bloody White Album reference of pigs, rise, and Helter Skelter, that they were written in blood on the crime scenes, were correlated with testimony about Manson predictions that the murders blacks would commit at the onset of the Helter Skelter would involve the writings of pigs on the walls in victims' blood. Basically he was using that to try to pin all these crimes on blacks to, create this race war. Testimony that Manson had said, quote, now is the time for Helter Skelter, unquote, was supplemented with Kasabian's testimony that on the night of the LaBianca murders, Manson considered discarding Rosemary LaBianca's wallet in the streets of a black neighborhood. Having obtained the wallet in the LaBianca house, he wanted a black person to pick it up and use the credit cards so that the people, the establishment, would think it was some sort of an organized group that killed these people. On his direction, Kasabian had hidden it in the woman's restroom of a service station near a black area. This is another quote. I want to show Blackie how to do it, Manson had said as the family members drove away after leaving the LaBianca house. So, basically, the whole prosecution of Manson himself was, establishing why he did this and how he got the family members to commit these crimes. During the trials, family members loitered near the entrances and corridors of the courthouse. Just to interject here a little bit, it wasn't just them. There was 15 public seats in the courtroom, and they had hundreds of people lined up at the courthouse every day to try to get those 15 seats to sit in on this trial. That's how high profile this was, how controversial it was. People wanted to be there for this. To keep them out of the courtroom proper, the prosecution subpoenaed them as prospective witnesses. This is the family members who would not be able to enter while the others were testifying. When the group established itself in a vigil on the sidewalk, some members wore sheathed hunting knives that, although in plain view, were carried legally. Each of them was also identifiable by the X on their forehead. Some family members attempted to dissuade witnesses from testifying. Prosecution witness Paul Watkins and Juan Flynn were both threatened. Watkins was badly burned in a suspicious fire in his van. Former family members Barbara Hoyt, who had overheard Susan Atkins describing the Tate murders to the family members, family member Ruth Ann Morehouse, agreed to accompany the latter to Hawaii. There, Morehouse allegedly gave her a hamburger spiked with several doses of LSD. Oh dear.
I'd be pissed.
Found sprawled on a Honolulu curb in a drugged semi-stupor, Hoyt was taken to the hospital, where she did her best to identify herself as a witness to Tate LaBianca murder trial. Before the incident, Hoyt had been a reluctant witness. After the attempt to silence her, her resistance disappeared. On August 4th, despite precautions taken by the court, Manson flashed the jury a Los Angeles Times front page whose headline was "Manson Guilty, Nixon Declares." This was a reference to a statement made the previous day when U.S. President Richard Nixon had described what he saw as the media's glamorization of Manson. Jurors considered that the headline had not influenced them. The next day, the female defendants stood up and said in unison that, in light of Nixon's remarks, there was no point in going on with the trial. On October 5th, Manson was denied the court's permission to question a prosecution witness whom defense attorneys had declined to cross-examine. Leaping over the defense table, Manson attempted to attack the judge. He was wrestled to the ground by bailiffs and was removed from the courtroom with the female defendants, who had subsequently risen and begun chanting in Latin. Thereafter, Older allegedly began wearing a revolver under his robes. On November 16th, the prosecution rested its case. 3 days later, after arguing standard dismissal motions, the defense stunned the court by resting as well, without calling a single witness. Shouting their disapproval, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten demanded their right to testify. In chambers, the woman's lawyers told the judge their clients wanted to testify that they had planned and committed the crimes and that Manson had not been involved. By resting their case, the defense lawyers had tried to stop this. Van Houten's attorney, Ronald Hughes, vehemently stated that he would not push a client out the window. In the prosecution's view, it was Manson who was advising the women to testify in this way as a means of saving himself. Speaking about the trial in 1987 documentary, Krenwinkel said the entire proceedings were scripted by Charlie. The next day, Manson testified. Lest Manson's address violate the California Supreme Court's decision in People versus Aranda by making statements implicating his co-defendants, the jury was removed from the courtroom. Speaking for more than an hour, Manson said, among other things, that the music is telling the youth to rise up against the establishment. He said, "Why blame it on me? I didn't write the music. To be honest with you," Manson also stated, "I don't recall ever saying, get a knife and a change of clothes and go do what Tech says." As the body of the trial concluded, and with the closing arguments impending, defense attorney Hughes disappeared during a weekend trip. When Maxwell Keith was appointed to represent Van Houten, in Hughes' absence, a delay of more than 2 weeks was required to permit Keith to familiarize himself with the voluminous trial transcripts. No sooner had the trial resumed, just before Christmas, that disruptions of the prosecution's closing arguments by the defendants led Older to ban the 4 defendants from the courtroom for the remainder of the guilt phase. This may have occurred because the defendants were acting in collusion with each other and were simply putting on a performance, which Older said was becoming obvious. On January 25th, 1971, the jury returned guilty verdicts against the 4 defendants on each of the 27 separate counts against them. Not far into the trial's penalty phase, the jurors saw at least the defense of Manson, in the prosecution's view, had planned to present. Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten testified the murders had been conceived as copycat versions of the Hinman murder, for which Atkins now took credit. The killings, they said, were intended to draw suspicion away from Bobby Beliosi by resembling the crime for which he had been jailed. The plan had supposedly been the work of and carried out under the guidance of not Manson, but someone allegedly in love with Beliosi, Linda Kasabian. Among the narrative's weak points was the inability of Atkins to explain why. As she was maintaining, she had written Political Piggy at the Hinman house in the first place. Midway through the penalty phase, Manson shaved his head and trimmed his beard to a fork. He told the press, "I am the devil, and the devil always has a bald head." And what the prosecution regarded as belated recognition on their part that imitation of Manson only proved his domination. The female defendants refrained from shaving their heads until the jurors returned to weigh the state's request for the death penalty. In an effort to exonerate Manson via the copycat scenario failed, on March 29th, 1971, the jury returned verdicts of death against all 4 defendants on all counts. On April 19th, 1971, Judge Older sentenced the 4 to death. Then I believe it was a little while later. I don't have it in the notes here, but it was only a couple of years later. I think it was 1977. California overturned the death penalty, which automatically converted all their sentences into mandatory life sentences.
So the 70s to 80s, on the day the verdicts recommending the death penalty were returned, news came that the badly decomposed body of Ronald Hughes had been found wedged between two boulders in Ventura County. It was rumored, although never proven, that Hughes was murdered by the family, possibly because he had stood up to Manson and refused to allow Van Houten to take the stand and absolve Manson of the crimes, though he might have perished in flooding. Family member Sandra Good stated that Hughes was the first of the retaliation murders. Watson returned to McKinney, Texas after the Tate LaBianca murders. He was arrested in Texas on November 30th, 1969, after local police were notified by California investigators that his fingerprints were found to match a print found on the front door of the Tate home. Watson fought extradition to California long enough that he was not included among the three defendants tried with Manson. The trial commenced in August 1971. By October, he, too, had been found guilty on 7 counts of murder and 1 of conspiracy. Unlike the others, Watson presented a psychiatric defense. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi made short work of Watson's insanity claims. Like his co-conspirators, Watson was sentenced to death. In February of 1972, the death sentences of all 5 parties were automatically reduced to life in prison by People v. Anderson, in which the California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in the state. After his return to prison, Manson's rhetoric and hippie speeches held little sway. Though he found temporary acceptance from the Aryan Brotherhood, his role was submissive to a sexually aggressive member of the group at San Quentin. Before the conclusion of Manson's Tate LaBianca trial, a reporter for the Los Angeles Times tracked down Manson's mother, remarried and living in the Pacific Northwest. The former Kathleen Maddox claimed that in childhood, her son had suffered no neglect. He had even been pampered by all the women who surrounded him. I found that interesting because that could explain why most of the family was attributed to being women. You know, he's trying to maintain that childhood that he had. So the 80s to present. So 1980s to present. In a 1994 conversation with Manson prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, Catherine Scher, a one-time Manson follower, stated that her testimony in the penalty phase of Manson's trial had been a fabrication intended to save Manson from the gas chamber, and that it had been given under Manson's explicit direction. Scher's testimony had introduced the copycat motive story, which the testimony of the 3 female defendants echoed, and according to which the Tate LaBianca murders had been Linda Kasabian's idea. A 1997 segment of tabloid television program Hard Copy, Scher implied that her testimony had been given under a Manson threat of physical harm. In August 1971, after Manson's trial and sentencing, Scher had participated in a violent California retail store robbery, the object of which was the acquisition of weapons to help free Manson. In January 1996, a Manson website was established by the latter-day Manson follower George Stimson, who was helped by Sandra Good. Good had been released from prison in 1985 after serving 10 years of her 15-year sentence for the death threats. In a 1998-1999 interview in Seconds magazine, Bobby Bucioli rejected the view that Manson ordered him to kill Gary Hinman. He stated that Manson did, in fact, come to Hinman's house and slash Hinman with a sword, which he had previously denied in a 1981 interview with We magazine. Bucioli stated that when he read about the Tate murders in the newspaper, quoting, "I wasn't even sure at that point. Really, I had no idea who had done it until Manson's group were actually arrested for it. It had only crossed my mind, and I had a premonition, perhaps. There was some little tickle in my mind that the killings might be connected with them," end quote. In the We magazine interview, he had stated, quote, "When the Tate LaBianca murders happened, I knew who had done it. I was fairly certain," end quote. William Garrettson, once a younger caretaker at 10,050 Cielo Drive, indicated in a program, The Last Days of Sharon Tate, broadcast on July 25th, 1999 on E!, that he had, in fact, seen and heard a portion of the Tate murders from his location in the property's guest house. This corroborated the unofficial results of the polygraph examination that had been given to Garrettson on August 10th, 1969, and that had effectively eliminated him as a suspect. The LAPD officer who conducted the examination had concluded Garrettson was quote-unquote clean on the participation in the crimes, but quote-unquote muddy as to his having heard anything. Garrettson did not explain why he had withheld his knowledge of the events. It was announced in early 2008 that Susan Atkins was suffering from brain cancer. An application for compassionate release based on her health status was denied in July of 2008, and she was denied parole for the 18th and final time on September 2nd, 2009. Atkins died of natural causes 22 days later, on September 24th, 2009, at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In a January 2008 segment of the Discovery Channel's Most Evil, Barbara Hoyt said that the impression that she had accompanied Ruth Ann Morehouse to Hawaii just to avoid testifying at Manson's trial was erroneous. Hoyt said that she had cooperated with the family because she was, quote-unquote, trying to keep them from killing my family. She stated that at the time of the trial, she was, quote-unquote, constantly being threatened. Your family's gonna die. The murders could be repeated at your house. On March 15th, 2008, the Associated Press reported that forensic investigators had conducted a search for human remains at Barker Ranch the previous month, following up on long-standing rumors that the family had killed hitchhikers and runaways who had come into its orbit during its time at Barker. The investigators identified 2 likely clandestine grave sites and 1 additional site that merits further investigation. Though they recommended digging, CNN reported on March 28th that the Inyo County Sheriff, who questioned the methods they employed with search dogs, had ordered additional tests before any excavation. On May 9th, after a delay caused by damage to test equipment, the sheriff announced that the test results had been inconclusive and that exploratory excavation would begin on May 20th. In the meantime, Charles Tex Watson had commented publicly that no one was killed at the desert camp during the month and a half he was there, after the Tate LaBianca murders. On May 21st, after 2 days of work, the sheriff brought the search to an end. 4 potential grave sites had been dug up and had been found to hold no human remains. In September 2009, the History Channel broadcast a docudrama covering the family's activities and the murders as part of its coverage on the 40th anniversary of the killings. The program included an in-depth interview with Linda Kasabian, who spoke publicly for the first time since the 1989 appearance on A Current Affair, an American television news magazine. Also included in the History Channel program were interviews with Vincent Bugliosi, Catherine Scher, and Deborah Tate, sister of Sharon. As the 40th anniversary of the Tate LaBianca murders approached in July 2009, Los Angeles Magazine published an oral history in which former family members, law enforcement officers, and others involved with Manson, the arrests, and the trials offered their recollections of and observations on the events that made Manson notorious in the article. Juan Flynn, a Spawn Ranch worker who had become associated with Manson and the family, said Charles Manson got away with everything. People will say he's in jail, but Charlie is exactly where he wants to be. Charles Manson died of a heart attack and complications from colon cancer on November 19th, 2017. He was 83 years old. So, I mean, all in all, you can see the Manson family was absolute fucking trash, and
I mean,
the mind games didn't
I just
stop.
think the guy's a whack job.
Well, of course he's a whack job, but I don't mean to give him credit, but there has to be a little bit given for the mind games that were played during the trial. I mean, that for as much of a whack job and left of center as he wasn't a stupid man. I do have to say that. So it's not like,
What do you think of the possibility that he was like actually super intelligent and just a extreme fucking racist and then played himself off as crazy to try to get off of the charges?
We'll,
that
we'll just go with
is
yes.
that is like identically where I was going with this.
I mean, that's a very good possibility, I think.
It's just, I mean, and he kept the act up right until the end, because it was just a few years ago, wasn't it, where there was a GIF or something that came out of him in one of his parole hearings where he flipped out and like started convulsing and shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he was actually super intelligent, and there was definitely something broken in his brain though. If you listen to if you listen to interviews with him, he's coming from such a far out place with his answers. They go right along with, in the trial there, don't blame me, it's the lyrics and the music, don't blame me, blame them, not me.
Yeah. You can't tell me that that's just off cuff. That's calculated.
And enough time went by where there was interview after interview after interview after interview over the course of a number of years that all his answers were very similar to questions. It was more like a philosophical answer almost, or something like that. He never gave a straight answer on anything. He never said a straight sentence.
I mean,
Yeah.
that could be argued though. Was that mind fucked from all of the drugs? Like a lot of people kind of, I guess, pawn it off to be, or is that like we're talking about
See,
that calculated?
I think a little bit of both, but mostly it's just, I don't know. I think it's this psychosis.
Well, and that's the thing, if he is this undercover genius that is putting up a strong front, obviously killing Sharon Tate would have made him mildly famous, but it wouldn't have kept his name around for as long as it has. The actions of this man during the trial, his entire life in prison after the conviction, everything else is what has kept him alive. And I think a lot of it was an act. Just, I mean, he basically acted like a complete whack job, so everybody for the rest of all eternity would go, "Oh, Charles Manson, wasn't he a fucking Fruit Loop? Look at the way he acted
Yeah, but
here. Look at this. Look at that." And people are going to constantly talk about him. So he basically cemented his legacy by doing it.
yeah, and that's the thing, was he cementing his legacy as this absolute lunatic, or did he keep getting put in front of people? Did he, on purpose? I don't know. If you follow the conspiracy theory of him being part of some CIA program, and they let him go, keep him in people's minds, keep young people today, if they didn't know that Charles Manson or the Manson murders ever happened, would they care if if it wasn't, if you don't keep putting it in front of somebody, his name will fade in time.
Yeah.
you know You know, like so many other characters that nobody's taught about anymore.
Yep.
So why was Manson just because he was so crazy? Just because he was so because he got 7 other people to do his bidding. Well, Hitler got an entire country to do his bidding. So I mean, it doesn't rank real high, I guess. But why was he? Why did he stay in the spotlight? Why did he stay in the spotlight for so long? There's a lot of crazy people out there, but why him?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's that's what goes on in my head anyway.
Well, and that's the other thing too. Was he kind of steered in this direction after they realized, if you buy into the MK Ultra thing, that it was a failed project, with the reappearance of that psychologist so many different times throughout the lead up to this. Maybe that's another thing. Maybe that is what caused him to go batshit insane, even though he was a brilliant mind. But after he went batshit insane, he was still being steered into a direction.
Right. Yeah, very possible.
So I do have to
But
say, it seems like you've settled in pretty well. When you're talking, it's a lot less interviewee and a lot more talking with friends.
right.
It seems like you're finding your groove. I like it.
Yeah, I think I figured it was going to take a minute,
Oh yeah,
Put it that
it
way.
took us a while to do not feel bad, but
Yeah, and I think as we go here, it'll get even better.
I did want to mention it and let you know that I do notice a difference, and maybe it'll help a little bit too, knowing that nobody somebody else notices.
Right.
But
No, and it does. I mean, and for growth and learning, you have to be pushed outside your comfort zone.
yeah,
So that's one of the reasons that, I kind of agreed to do this episode is to get pushed outside that comfort zone. That's where personal growth comes from.
yeah.
If we just stay stuck in doing what we do all the time, it just you don't grow, you don't learn, you know. So
Do
I've
you,
been kind of making a life practice of that, put it that way.
do you mind if I asked what was hampering or making you apprehensive? Was it like a karma thing? Was it a personal belief thing?
No, it's kind of more of a personal belief thing.
Okay.
Um, no, you know, say demons exist,
Uh huh.
okay? And what happens is there's a lot of power in a name, and you say the name over and over again, or say, in another case, say you are inclined to other spiritual activities, and say you're very spiritually sensitive, and the whole I see dead people thing, yeah, it's actually a thing. So when you're invoking these names, you saying them again and again and again, and then you put it on a recording, and then it gets put out there into the ether. These things can be drawn towards you,
Okay.
and if whether it be psychological with Manson, whether it be demon possession, whether it be whatever, calling those things out loud is spiritually dangerous. I'm not afraid of this topic. It's just I'm a little apprehensive about
What could come with it?
calling them. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. No,
That's why
I was,
you have a lot of people out there that can communicate with the dead, and they don't want to,
yeah.
because it keeps coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. That for me is not 100% the case, because I ignore them and tell them to piss off, and they generally do. But after something like this, do I kind of expect some weird shit to happen? It's very possible.
Yeah,
maybe nothing will happen. Maybe nothing.
I was just
But it's
curious.
possible.
I didn't know what, just so that
No.
going forward, we could kind of try to figure out something around it if it didn't work out for you.
No, and that's kind of why I mentioned the pushing outside the comfort zone thing,
Mm-hmm.
because if I don't do that, I can't learn and grow.
Yeah.
And say this is on my life path to learn these things. Well, there has to be a catalyst for the learning,
Okay.
good, bad, or otherwise. So, even though it kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit, it was put in my path. I'm gonna, learn to figure it out, deal with it, kind of thing.
Well, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the Skeptaholics podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you boys got nothing else to add.
Nope, I'm out.
Yeah. Hey.
Nope.
All right, we'll catch you all next week. Thanks for tuning in.
See you next week.
Stay skeptical.